coming in. We appreciate you being here. We want to do a couple things today. First of all, let me ask, how many of you are here for the first time for one of these form-based code presentations and meetings? Oh, Rob Taylor, you already know this stuff. Okay, a few. We always get a few new people. So for those of you who have been here before and heard some of these presentations, you're going to hear some repeated information. So bear with us, but we want to make sure we get everybody up to speed. What we want to do is, first of all, just give you a brief overview. What is a form-based code? Why do we think we need it here in Chattanooga? And then we'll dive into some more specific issues and talk about land use and building heights, and basically how we came to the recommendations that we're making in this new code for the types of land uses that will be allowed and the building heights. And then we'll just wrap up by giving you an idea of what's coming up next in terms of our schedule. If I could ask you to hold any questions until the end, just to be courteous to those who may be here on their lunch break and need to get back within the hour. We want to be sure we stay on schedule. But I will be here for a few minutes after the presentation. We'll be glad to take some questions then. And we also want to invite any and all of you after that to come upstairs to the third floor, particularly if you have questions about a specific piece of property or a real detailed question. We've got lots of big maps upstairs, so we can look up your specific piece of property and talk to you at length up there. And also, I'd like for you to come back on March 3rd. We'll be having one more of these open house events, as well as a lunchtime presentation on March 3rd. Okay. So what is a form-based code? Why are we doing this? Really, this is just a tool that we are proposing to use in the city to help us regulate how land is developed, what gets built in our downtown area. Unfortunately, the zoning ordinance we've been living with for many decades is very old. It doesn't work very well for downtown urban areas. It works okay out in the suburbs, but most of the standards in that zoning ordinance were written for suburban style development, where buildings are pushed back really far away from the street and all the parking is in front, and residential is in one area and commercial is in another, and all those uses are separated. And that's really not what we have downtown. In downtown, you have much more intense development, multi-story buildings pulled up close to the sidewalk, a mix of uses going on even on one particular piece of property. So we really need a code that allows that type of development to happen and really promotes that type of development. So that's what we're doing. Over the years, we've had a lot of planning, visioning meetings with the public. I'm sure many of you, I know many of you, have been involved in some of those. And repeatedly, people are telling us in the downtown area they want the downtown to be urban. They want it to have a mix of uses, a lot of activities going on. They want it to be safe. They want it to be walkable. It needs to be pedestrian-friendly downtown. And unfortunately, again, the zoning ordinance that we have really isn't promoting that form of development. And so that's what we're hoping to fix with this new code. This is the area where the form-based code will be applied. It's a pretty large area. It includes the North Shore, the riverfront, the city center or central business district, the M.L. King neighborhood, and the Southside neighborhoods. So it covers a pretty large area, and there's quite a diversity within that area. And again, we're trying to write the code so that it promotes the type of development that people have been telling us they want to see in each of those different parts of the downtown area. So, how is this different? How is it similar to what we have now? First of all, despite the strange name, form-based code, this is just zoning. We've had a zoning ordinance we've been living with for decades now. This is just a little bit different. We think it's going to be a better zoning for the downtown area. One of the big differences between this new zoning and our current zoning is our current zoning tends to focus heavily on the use of land. What can you do on your property? What goes on inside the buildings? Is it commercial? Is it residential? Is it industrial? It focuses about 80% on those sorts of issues, and only about 20% on the actual form of the building. how tall buildings can be, how close they are to the street, where the parking goes, those sorts of things. This new code, or this new zoning, kind of flips that percentage. So it still deals with uses, but it's a little more flexible when it comes to uses, and it focuses more heavily on the building form itself. And if you think about it, intuitively that makes more sense in a downtown area. We have buildings that have been in our downtown for 100 years or more, but the uses inside those buildings have been changing over the decades. And so we really want to be pretty flexible when it comes to uses, but we want to make sure we get the buildings right to start with, because hopefully they're going to be with us for a long time to come. So, but again, don't get hung up by the name, form-based code, and ultimately it's just zoning. Okay, so I'm going to jump into a little discussion about land use and building heights. When we started this, again, we went back and looked at all of the adopted plans that have been done over the years for the different areas within the downtown. We also asked people some of the same questions back at the beginning of last year in January when we had our kickoff, and again in March at our charrette. So what do you want to see in the downtown? And again, so these were some of the things people told us. So we made a list of value statements or principles, and as we're working on this new code, we keep going back and asking ourselves, is this standard promoting one of these principles, one or more of these principles? If it's not, maybe we don't need that particular standard. So I'll just quickly go through some of these. First of all, as I said before, everybody wants a safe, walkable, active downtown, especially along the street, whether you're in a car or walking or riding a bike or on the electric shuttle. That's where most of us experience the downtown until we go inside a building. It's from the street. It's really our most important public space. We also want to maximize opportunities for new development and reinvestment throughout this area, but especially in the core, in the central business district. I mean, that's where you have your tallest buildings, your most intense development, and so we really want to promote new development in these areas. We also want to provide a diversity of housing options. Based on some of the research and studies we've been doing, we know our population is growing. We know our population is diversifying. Especially the younger generation, the millennials, are really they're wanting to live in these downtown urban areas that are close, maybe close to their jobs or close to theaters and restaurants and things, much more so than the baby boomers of my generation or older. But in the past, we haven't had a lot of options for them. We've had, either single-family homes or high-rise apartment buildings, and there are a whole lot of options in between that we want to continue to develop. We also want to make sure that the development that occurs helps support things people are asking for, like grocery stores. We hear that a lot. New transit options. Everybody, keeps saying, why can't we get additional shuttle routes? Well, for one thing, they cost money, first of all. But another thing, you need a certain concentration of development, a concentration of people in order to support those businesses and support those transit services. So we want to make sure that what we build does that. So those are some reasons why you might want more development, more intense, maybe taller buildings. There are also some reasons to temper that a little bit, and some of these issues on the second half of this list get to that. We have some established single-family residential neighborhoods within the downtown, and those people really value that lifestyle. They've chosen to live there, and they've told us over and over, we want to protect that. We don't want to see high-rise buildings or big multi-story apartments or commercial buildings come in right next to our single-family homes. So we're trying to come up with a balance of, while on one hand, promoting more mixed-use development, on the other hand, protecting those existing residential areas from what happens right next to them. Similarly, with historic districts, we have a number of historic districts in the downtown area. This area, Market and Main Street, is one. There's one up at M.L. King Boulevard. And most of the existing buildings in those historic districts are 2, 3, 4 stories, maybe 1 or 2 that are 5 stories. And again, people have said those historic buildings, those historic districts are important. They help add character and make our downtown unique from other cities. So we want to protect those. The economist on our form-based code team said you want to be careful that you don't overzone within those historic districts. So if you have mostly 2, 3, 4-story buildings existing and you zone them in the future for 6, 7-story buildings, you put all those historic buildings in danger of being torn down in favor of something much bigger. So if in fact those are important to you, if you want to keep them, then you need to be cognizant of that. We're also trying to balance between conservation of open space and new development along the riverfront. We've had some really interesting discussions about this. A lot of folks think, it's very valuable real estate along the riverfront. We need to maximize that. A lot of people said we want taller buildings along the riverfront. Many other people have said, no, let's don't get too tall. We kind of like the scale we have going right now. Let's keep it at that level. We don't want to block off the riverfront. So we're trying to find a balance with that. We also have some hills, some topography on both this side of the river and on the north side of the river that we're taking into account. Again, a lot of people have told us we don't want to see really, really tall buildings on top of the hills in the downtown. And then finally, again, we went back and looked at all of the adopted plans that many of you were involved in and trying to make sure that what we're proposing here supports those plans. So again, each time we're reviewing this draft document, this draft code, we're going back and asking ourselves, does this particular standard promote one or more of these principles? So, how did we come up with our recommendations for land use? This list of colored rectangles you see there is the list of all the new zones that will be included in this area under the form-based code. So there are some residential zones, there are some commercial zones, there are even some industrial zones. And in assigning those zones to different properties, we looked at a number of things. We looked, first of all, at what's there right now. How is the property being used today? What is it zoned today? It may be used one way and zoned something else. So we've taken that into account. We've also looked at what's happening nearby. Oftentimes, not oftentimes, but sometimes we'll have a single-family house right next to an industrial zone. And we're thinking, maybe we need a little more gradual transition between those uses. So we've taken all that into account. Again, the riverfront. It's kind of a special area. Most of the development we've seen recently along the riverfront has been either apartments, condominiums, or hotels. That may continue for a while into the future. When we looked at the very first draft of this code, we weren't allowing much commercial development. And we thought, well, that's kind of crazy because you want retail and some restaurants and things along the river. That's a great place for it. So we've gone back and tweaked that a little bit. So those are the kinds of things we're looking at. We're also looking at where we want to encourage retail. And this is something, again, that the economists have told us. You don't want to spread your retail too thin. We've heard that a lot over the years. As you all know, retail likes to be close to other retail. If McDonald's moves in on one corner, Burger King wants the other corner, right? I guess that's why malls have worked so well over the years. They put everything all together. So our team looked at the existing retail in the downtown and said, let's try and focus new retail in these areas. We're not going to dictate where you have to put retail, but let's try and support the retail that we have and kind of focus new retail in those areas if we can. So it may be a little hard to see, but these kind of reddish colors on the map indicate our retail zones. We're calling it the shopfront zone, or SH for shopfront. The different shades or different values of red, and the numbers again indicate the number of stories, the maximum number of stories you could have if you were to build a new building. And that changes based on where you are within the downtown area. So you'll see some, I forgot to bring my pointer, you'll see some kind of dark red right in the middle around Market and Main Street, and then some lighter shades further out along Main, and some even lighter shades up on ML King Boulevard. What we're proposing to do, again, we're not saying you have to build retail in those areas, and we're not saying you can't build retail anywhere else. You could build retail in many of these zones, except in the residential areas. But one of the standards that will be in here is if you're in the shopfront zone, we're going to ask you, if you're building a new building, to build a tall first floor. Any of you involved in retail or development know that retail uses like to have tall ground floors. So we're thinking that that will help encourage retail in the future. Now, if you build a new building and you build your tall ground floor, you don't have to put retail in there day one. In fact, it may never have retail there. You could have housing, or you could have offices, or something else on that ground floor. But ultimately, we're hoping that if the retail market improves in the downtown area, then that area can support retail in the future. So a little nuance there. It's a little different from what we have now. Oh, sorry, these lines were just to kind of orient you. The vertical blue line is Market Street. The more horizontal, I guess diagonal line is M.L. King Boulevard. And then this one at the bottom is Main Street, just so you can see where you are. And same map here, where those lines are. So residential uses. Let's talk a little bit about that. Again, we're trying to really preserve and protect those single-family residential neighborhoods that we already have in the downtown. So everything you see up here in yellow is currently basically a single-family residential neighborhood. And so that's the way we've coded it to be in the future. You'll notice around the edges of those single-family areas, we've coded it this orange color, which means residential attached. So you could have things like townhomes in that area. So a little more intense than just a single-family use, but again, we're trying to make kind of a gradual transition and not just put single-family residential right next to heavy commercial or industrial or something. And we've tried to keep those single-family areas pretty much intact and put other uses around the edges, or as in the case along M.L. King Boulevard, we've got some existing older large homes that have already been converted into houses right on M.L. King Boulevard. So on some major streets, we're allowing for some more intense residential development. But again, trying to be careful about those transitions and make sure that we don't encroach on those existing single-family areas with something a lot taller or a lot more intense. And speaking of taller, leads into building heights. So when you look at the maps with all the different colors on them, you're going to see two letters and a number. The letters stand for the name of the zone. SH was shop front, CX is commercial mixed use, that sort of thing. The numbers always refer to the maximum number of stories that you could have if you're building a new building. If you have an existing building, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to suddenly go add another story to your existing building tomorrow after this passes. So in looking at building heights, first of all, we recognize that, again, in the central business district, that's where we currently have our tallest buildings. That's where you want more intense development. So we've tried to allow much taller buildings in that area. So we've gone up as high as 12 stories in the central business district. And then as you move away from that downtown core, the heights get a little bit lower until you get down again to those single family areas. We're down to about 2 stories. Couple other things. Well, I'll come back to this one. Again, we're trying to be cognizant of the single family residential areas. So if you have a building or a piece of property that's right next to a single-family home or one of these residential zones, we're holding the height of those new buildings to 2 stories within 30 feet of that single-family zone. So again, even if maybe you want to put a small apartment building next to a single-family home, anything within 30 feet of that property line, you're going to have to take it down to 2 stories. Once you get further away, you can go up a little bit. But again, we're trying to protect those single-family areas because they don't want really tall buildings right next to them. Again, similar thing with the historic districts. In the historic districts, most of the existing buildings are 3 and 4 stories. So we've held the maximum building heights in those areas to the same. Same thing with Bluffview. Even though it's not technically a National Historic District, everybody seems to think it is. And we want to protect those areas and not overzone that. So we've kept that area at about 3 to 4 stories. Number of people have asked us, so if you're putting a maximum building height of 12 stories in the central business district, isn't that going to limit development potentially in the future? Well, we took a close look at that, and we don't think it will. We took a look at what's been built in the last 10 years. We looked at all the buildings in our downtown currently that are over 10 stories, and that's what this map is about. Everything you see in green is what's been built in the last 10 years, and the numbers indicate how many stories those buildings are. So you can see nothing is over 10 stories that's been built in the last 10 years. In fact, the only one that gets up to 10 stories is kind of in the middle there, and that's the one that's under construction right now in the 700 block of Market Street, which we're all very happy to see happening. The white rectangles are the buildings that are over 12 stories. There aren't many of them. I think there are 8 or 9 throughout this entire area. And the most recent one of those was the Marriott Hotel down at the Convention Center, and that was built back in 1982. So it's been a long time since we've built anything that tall. So we think putting a maximum height of 12 stories in the central business district is reasonable right now. You know, if 5 to 10 years from now, if our market really starts booming and we're getting a lot of requests for taller buildings, well then we probably need to go back and take a look at the whole code again and see if we need to bump those building heights up. But for now, we think we're pretty comfortable with the 12 stories. We also, I mentioned the riverfront was a little, we took some special look at that. Again, many folks wanted to see taller buildings along the riverfront. Many wanted to see lower buildings. So we looked at the heights of the bridges. We were thinking, well, at least next to the bridges, maybe you could go a little higher because those are really massive structures. And we started out saying, well, maybe we could go 8 to 10 stories next to the bridges. And a lot of folks still said, no, that's still too much. So we actually got our engineers with the city to measure the bridges for us. So you see some of the heights here. The Veterans Bridge, where it touches down on the North Shore, is 58 feet high. The old Jotty Bridge on the North Shore is 54 feet high. So those are more like, you know, maybe 5, 6-story buildings. On the South Shore, Old Jotty Bridge is a little taller. It goes up to 64 feet. And you can see the volunteer building there in the middle. We just said, well, okay, that's 8 stories, and we paced off the same distance from that building as we did from these bridges and took those photographs. So you get an idea, I won't say it's actually absolutely perfect, but get an idea of what an 8-story building would look like there. So currently what we're recommending is that the tallest buildings in the riverfront would be capped at 6 stories. And those are mostly kind of on the western and eastern edges next to the bridges. And then as you come, say, closer to Coolidge Park, on the North Shore, the buildings get a little bit lower. So that's what we're proposing right now. So again, all this is still a draft until the City Council adopts it. So we really appreciate any feedback any of you have about any of these issues. We also took a look at some of our existing neighborhoods again. We have several instances where you have a pretty major commercial corridor like ML King or Fraser Avenue, Cherokee Boulevard, Main Street, and right behind them you've got some residential neighborhoods. So we wanted to take a look again at the transition of height. So as you can see from this little section drawing, this was around ML King Boulevard. If you've got property fronting ML King, right now most of them are in the 3 to 4 story range as you get kind of beyond the railroad trestle. So we're holding it at that and thinking that that's a good transition to those single family neighborhoods behind there. If you have an alley behind you that gives you a little more separation between that and the residential area, that's probably a little better, but not all of them do. So again, we're trying to be sensitive to that. Okay, this is something that's a little bit different. I've been talking about maximum building heights. We're also going to have some minimum building heights in this new code. Now this is something we don't have right now in our current code. Again, in order to really promote an active, pedestrian-friendly downtown, in order to get the kinds of services and grocery stores and more transit services and those sorts of things that people want, we're going to have to build up a little bit. If all we build is single-use, single-story buildings all over downtown, we'll never get there. I mean, those types of services need more people. So what we're proposing is throughout pretty much the entire area, with the exception of the residential areas, this would not apply to them. We're going to have a 2-story height minimum. So if you're building a new building, we would ask you to build at least 2 stories. Again, if you have an existing 1-story building, you're not planning on enlarging it or anything, you don't have to do anything, you're fine. When you get to the central business district, right in the core of the downtown, we're actually recommending some minimum stories of minimum heights of 3 and 4 stories on some of the primary streets like Market and Broad, some of those areas. Again, trying to build up that downtown core. So this is a little different, kind of a different way of thinking, but we think, again, we're going back and looking at those principles, and we're thinking that that's really going to support the type of development people are saying they want to see. And here's just a visual image. Again, Broad Street and some suburban street, they're both about 7-lane roads, but the character around them, the character of those buildings looks very, very different. In the suburbs, you tend to have buildings set way back, pretty low in height, and that's really not the way our downtown looks currently. You need some more building height to get some of that mix of uses and activity that we want to see. This gets a little bit into the process, into the administration of this code, but I want to touch on it because it does deal with building height. Once this code is adopted, it will be administered by the city staff. If, say, you own a piece of property, you want to build a new building, and it doesn't quite meet the standards in this new code, there's a mechanism, a process for you to apply for something different, to apply for an exception. If it's just a minor modification that you need, say in terms of building height, if all you need is 5 more feet, say your floor-to-floor height just needs to be a little bit higher to get the kind of development you want, all you need is 5 more feet, that's the kind of minor modification that the city staff will be able to grant you if they feel that it's reasonable. So that's something we don't have right now. Currently, if you need any kind of modification to the current zoning ordinance, you've got to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which can be a long, rather protracted process. So we're trying to streamline this a little bit. However, again, if you're within 30 feet of one of those single-family areas, then the staff's not going to be able to grant this modification for you. At that point, you're going to have to go to a new committee. It's going to be called, we think it's going to be called a FormBased Code Committee. That committee will be able to grant exceptions a little bit greater. We're calling them major modifications. So in the case of building heights, they'll be able to grant you 1 more story. So maybe you're in a CX4 zone, commercial mixed use with a maximum height of 4 stories, and you really want 5 stories. You can go before this committee, and they can possibly grant you that extra story, but only 1. If you want more than 1 story, then you're going to have to go to City Council and ask to have your property rezoned to another zone to get the additional story. And the committee will be, their meetings will be public meetings, they'll be advertised, so say if you live near a piece of property where someone's trying to do this, you'll get notification about that. So again, a lot of this goes back to trying to protect some of the existing residential areas and other properties in the downtown. This committee, again, this will be a little new. The members will be appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council. Probably have about 7 people on the committee. And proposing it be made up of a mixture of design and development professionals, developers, builders, architects, landscape architects, as well as some representatives, some property owners, residents from within this boundary. So you've got a mixture of folks and mixture of perspectives there. Again, all their meetings will be public, so as we do today, we'll probably put signs up, we'll send letters out to everyone within 300 feet of that piece of property. So if you live near there, you'll get some notice about it, be able to come to the meeting and hear what's being proposed and let folks know how you feel about it. As with the zoning that we have today, we always have to have an appeals process. If you're still not happy with the decision you're getting from the staff or from this FormBased Code Committee, you can always appeal to the City Council. And of course, their meetings are always public. So it gives folks an opportunity to hear about what's being proposed and to come to a meeting and react to it. Okay, I just threw a lot of information at you. Where are we going from here? This schedule is tentative, I will say that. The March 3rd, the next open house, that one's firm. We'll be meeting again here in this building. We'll be here all day. In fact, we're going to be here until 7:30 at night that day. So just drop by if you have other questions. You're welcome to come anytime. You don't need an appointment. During lunchtime, we'll have a presentation similar to this, but it's going to focus on things like parking and landscaping and signage, those kinds of standards in the new code. So if you have questions about that, that might be a good one for you to come to. We're hoping, this is not set in stone yet, but we're hoping on or around March 17th, we're going to schedule a special planning commission meeting where the only topic they're going to be looking at that day is the form-based code. So it will allow people plenty of time to come in and ask questions, make comments without having to listen to all the other zoning requests throughout the entire county. So if you signed in today, you're now on our email list and you'll get notification when we confirm that meeting date. So if you're interested in that, be looking for that date. We're hoping to then take it to the Planning Commission for action by April 11th. And then from that point, we're hoping to go to City Council in May. Now again, this is a tentative schedule. Kind of depends on how the meetings are going, the kind of reaction we're getting from people. People keep asking, when is this thing going to be adopted? Well, we can't say for sure, because even if we do get to City Council in May, they may want to chew on it for a couple months and get more reaction from the community. But that's our goal right now. So again, just stay tuned, look for the emails, our little newsletter we're sending out once a week, and we'll give you a schedule update each time. In the meantime, anytime if you have questions, you can find a lot of information on our project website. That's the cha-fbc.com. We're actually, as you can see, taping these presentations, so the presentation will be on that website or linked to it. So if you know someone that couldn't be here today and they were interested in the topic or just want to see the presentation, they can go to that. There's a lot of other information on there. The full draft code is on there. A lot of other things, so check that out. And you can always send us an email. This is my email address and phone number. Feel free to contact us directly if you need to, and feel free to stick around a little longer today if you have questions. Okay? And keep in mind, again, this is just zoning, and none of this is absolutely final until the City Council votes on it, hopefully sometime around May. Okay? So thank you again for being here. For those of you that maybe need to get back to your business or get back to work, feel free to head out. Those of you who can stay a little longer, if you have some questions, we'll stick around for a little while.